I chose Wonder to talk about after visiting a exhibit at the Renwick Museum, which is one of the 12 museums in Washington, D.C. It was an opening for the Renwick after a couple of years of renovation, and it really opened with a bang, having 9 leading contemporary artists each fill a room with a huge installation. The artists included Jennifer Angus, Gabriel Daw, and Maya Lin, the designer of the Vietnam Memorial. These site-specific installments were on the theme of wonder, and it's a little ironic that I'm speaking about wonder because it's probably the hardest way to access wonder is through words and chat, and I'll do the best I can. Many of these were installations that used unexpected materials like marbles and note cards and dead insects, for example, something you wouldn't expect to see. I visited the exhibit twice, once with my wife and daughter, and then another time with my niece. And it's open till May 8th, by the way, if you're interested in going down to DC to see it. It's a free exhibit, and it's really unique. Besides being fun outings, these visits got me thinking about the experience of wonder and how we could all use more of it in our lives. I know I could. We know what the experience is like when we have it to a degree. We know it in the wide-eyed expression of children looking at a dragonfly in a jar, for example. But it's harder to describe. Now, Nicholas Bell, who's the curator of the Renwick exhibit, talked about wonder as a part of the experience of art. And he said, artistic creations can engender wonder when they, quote, startle us, overwhelm us, and invite us to marvel at their creation. Now, this description made sense to me, though the 3 experiences, the idea of being startled or overwhelmed or invited to marvel, have very different characteristics, right? When something startles us, we're surprised. There's something unexpected that's happening, and it momentarily makes us unsteady. But when we're overwhelmed, we're bowled over, we're knocked down, pushed around, like being run over by a car to a degree. And to be invited to marvel, though, is much more gentle. It's more that the object of wonder doesn't bowl us over so much as we enter into the object ourselves under control and on our own power. And to marvel at something is more of an investigation, I feel. And I had some of those experiences at the Renwick. At times my senses were thrown off balance and I had to sort of readjust and recalibrate. But I never really felt overwhelmed. Most of all, though, I was really invited to marvel at these things. Now, my favorite work at the show is actually on the cover of it by Gabriel Daw. The picture doesn't do it justice. You can come up and look at it. But basically, it was in the center of one room and it combined colored light with nylon strings that basically brought together this glowing spectrum of color in a huge upside-down V. And the most surprising thing about it is when you moved, the sort of colors changed, but it felt like it had a huge depth. It was only about a foot or 2 wide, but it felt like you could almost enter into it. It drew me close to it, like I wanted to walk into a rainbow or something. And it certainly did it for the other guests because you could hear the guard's mantra in that room more than any other room saying, please step away from the exhibit, please don't touch the exhibit. Everybody wanted to just walk into this field of color. It was an 18-foot high upside-down rainbow. Another favorite of mine was by Jennifer Angus, who basically, you had this room that had this pink wash up the walls. And it was decorated with a pattern of dots and dashes that made it look like a Mexican weaving, if you're familiar with them, geometric symbols and like the skulls from Day of the Dead. And as you walked in, it felt like the walls were kind of enveloping you and wrapping you in a warm fabric, and it was so inviting. But then when you got up closer to it, you suddenly had this surprise. The surprise was that all those dots and dashes were in fact dead insects. Most of them moths and beetles, but others too. They were pinned on the wall like some bizarre entomology collection. For anyone creeped out by bugs, the initial retraction to this warm room clashes with a growing mild repulsion, right? And that push and pull is jarring. It's almost like we're tricked into marvel of it. And then all of a sudden you realize you're standing on an anthill and the little critters are climbing up your legs. It's like very bizarre. Curiosity and aversion collide, and that's some of the jarring nature that wonder can involve. Now, in the middle of Angus's room was a cabinet filled with bugs in odd arrangements, some simple patterns and some sort of whimsical scenes of anthropomorphized bug life. In one, there was a queen beetle being serenaded by 3 beetle musicians, for example, in these little drawers. It kind of reminded me of dioramas that kids make for their grade school projects. The cabinet actually was a precursor to the modern museum. During the Middle Ages, most artwork was only displayed within religious contexts. And when people began to collect artwork, they began displaying them in their homes, in their cabinets. Early private collections of arts were referred to by the German word Wunderkammer, which means wonder cabinet. In English, the term was used cabinets of curiosity. You may have heard those terms. They were stuffed with small paintings and little sculptures and natural objects like fossils or shells or feathers or little stuffed birds. And these cabinets were partly aesthetic displays and partly scientific collections in a way. I know that the artist must have thought about that as she painstakingly pinned this collection of beauty and science together on the walls of this installation. Now, part of the fun of this exhibit was watching the other people at the exhibit. That's one of the fun parts of museums. Unlike a lot of museums where they seem to be filled with overly serious adults and bored children, in this, the children were alive like in no other art museum that I've ever seen. But even the adults had the child brought out of them. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of smiling, and in one room, there was a carpet on the ground, and everybody was lying on their backs, looking up at the ceiling at this nylon netting with light-colored changes in it. And it just felt so playful, the adults acting so much younger than normal. Wonder is more accessible, I think, to children. The environmentalist Rachel Carson said that we have an inborn sense of wonder, and that sometimes we connect best with it when we're young. Another writer that I read said that 99% of your moments of wonder is when you're a kid. That might be overblown. But that makes sense, because when you're younger, everything is new and unusual to you. And as you grow older, you may get jaded. Children are more easily surprised and overwhelmed by sensory experience in particular. Some people even call wonder a childish emotion. I think that's probably true, and I'm going to do a little test today. I want you to bring into your mind what the face of wonder is, like when you find something of wonder, or when you were young. And I'd like you, see how playful you are today, I would like you in a moment to make that face. You got that? You got that? All right, so we'll see. I'm going to have a record of this. If you're not, this will not be posted on YouTube, but on 3, I want you to make a face of wonder. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Oh, good. Most of you are doing it. Very good. There's actually studies that show just making those faces create certain endorphins. So there's biological feedback with it. So wonder creates this physiological element. Now, plenty of philosophers loved wonder. Aristotle said wonder was the beginning of philosophy. But Descartes said that this most, quote, fundamental emotion can become an end in itself, and that people would just be distracted from more worthier pursuits and loftier goals, so you have to be careful. A modern philosopher wrote about wonder, a guy named Rittenhouse. He says, wonder can become excessive and make us crave novelty simply for its own sake. Wonder is only functional when it prompts us to resolve it in satisfaction of knowledge. So the philosopher is saying wonder is only good if it leads you to something. You shouldn't get stuck in sort of stupefaction. Like, wow, that's so wonderful, and not do anything productive. One article I used a lot for this talk was by a guy named Jesse Prince, and it's called How Wonder Works. And he talks about Adam Smith, actually, who spoke about wonder. Smith was not just an economist, but a philosopher. He said that there was something, this was according to Adam Smith, that induces something in life. The new and the unusual induces that staring, he says, quote, staring. That staring and sometimes that rolling of the eyes, that suspension of the breath, that swelling of the heart. The author said that he first felt wonder when he saw a sunset over the Serengeti. Nature certainly is a constant source for wonder, I think. Wondering about the marvels of nature is something that children do. It makes you feel both interconnected and insignificant at the same time. It makes you look both within and at the far reaches of the universe. So there's this double feeling in wonder quite often. During the summers that I go up to Quebec all my life as a child, I would spend a lot of time looking up at the stars that shine brighter than any I could see from a city where I lived most of the year. And the vastness of the universe was so clear and obvious to me, and it contrasted with my existence on my little puniness, right? On rare times up in Canada, when I would see the Northern Lights, I felt really that paradox of being an insignificant but privileged spectator of this marvelous show. In less dramatic ways, just looking out at the St. Lawrence River from the porch that I sit most of my summer times at creates for me a sense of wonder. I feel inspired, and I feel a wholeness of life. It's like the time, my past, my future all comes together in the vibrancy of the colors that change on the St. Lawrence River and in the sky above it. Less common than this afternoon display, but more common than Northern Lights, would be rainbows that would occur all the time. Because the sun set behind my house and lit the St. Lawrence River, and when the rain showers came through, you'd always hear people around the house say, "Rainbow! Rainbow!" And people would be cooking in the kitchen, and we'd all gather out to catch it. Sometimes they turned into double rainbows, huge arching things over the St. Lawrence. One day we hit a trifecta. We had rainbows before dinner, Northern Lights, and shooting stars after dinner. It was a real show. And my mother and father taught me to keep my eye open to that, to simply be aware and open. My father turned my eyes upwards. My younger brother was the one who really got into the science of it. I didn't really want the details. I just wanted to gaze at this vastness as my brother and he talked about all the details of charting the various stars. But it does bring up this common tension between the scientific rationalism and experiential wonder. Some people feel that science, in fact, can drown out wonder, which is curious. Richard Dawkins, in his book, Unweaving the Rainbow, that's a phrase he took from an apocryphal story as told by the poet Keats, who said that Sir Isaac Newton, quote, was guilty of destroying the poetry of the rainbow by reducing it to prismatic colors. So somehow, if you look too hard at wonder, you can sort of eliminate that element that draws us towards it. One of the greatest theologians of last century, Abraham Joshua Heschel, said, "Mankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation. The beginning of our happiness lies not in understanding that it lies in the understanding that life without wonder is not worth living." Is that how important wonder is? He says we go out into the world not only by way of expediency, but also by way of wonder. Power is the language of expediency, but poetry is the language of wonder. I think that's probably true. My father was a subatomic particle physicist, but he talked about working with that as if it was his poetry. Seeing bubble chamber charts of electrons spiraling around, to him, was the most beautiful manifestation of this wondrous universe. So I don't think there is a contradiction. Dawkins thinks that nature inspires wonder. And who could be more wonderful than the late great Carl Sagan, who marveled at science and the vastness before him? Now maybe some think that science kills wonder because they only think of wonder as a sensory experience. But I think there's also other types of wonder. I think there's a cognitive wonder. Things that are riddles that we try to figure out. Things that intrigue us and perplex us. We've got to figure out the key. What is the answer to that? That can be a cognitive sense of wonder. And also, some write about what they call spiritual wonder, which simply leads us to look up and around, seeking greater meaning in the universe. But whatever type of wonder you feel fills your life, it does seem that they all are more accessible to children than to adults. I don't blame scientific understanding, because science has only opened my mind to wonder. I blame a more mundane part of being a human being, and that is we get used to stuff. We get used to things. John Stuart Mill, amazingly, said, again, all these elements of wonder, he said, it is not understanding that destroys wonder, it is familiarity. When you get used to it, it seems less wonderful. So how can we keep the familiar alive in our lives? Start by saying, hang around children. That's probably the biggest one, I think. But if you're not around children, I'm more of a dabbler in this than a practitioner on a regular basis, but I often think that forms of mindfulness meditation can engender a sense of wonder in the world. I mean, the very first essay I read by Thich Nhat Hanh was entitled simply Eating a Tangerine. And Thich Nhat Hanh talks about the fact that when we eat, certainly when I eat, I just grab the food sometimes and just chow it down. I might be writing a platform or working on my emails. And if you were to ask me afterwards how that tangerine tasted, I might not be able to tell you. Thich Nhat Hanh says, we're actually not eating the tangerine, we're eating the future, or we're eating the past, or we're eating our emails. We don't actually eat the tangerine. So to be present as you're eating the tangerine is just to be aware of everything that your senses bring in. The scent as you peel it, the softness of the sections when you peel them apart, the tart coolness as you pop them into your mouth. To fully appreciate that, just drawing your attention can increase the amount of wonder in your life. Robert West's frame, he says, out of the stars in flight, out of the dust of eternity, where we have come, out of the stars have we come, out of the sea to the land, out of the sea trembled life. This is the marvel of life, rising to see and to know. Out of your heart cry wonder, sing that we live. Just being is enough to create wonder. Now that doesn't fit as well with Western philosophers who are perhaps overly intellectualized. And maybe if you're not a poet or if you're not a meditator, how else can you access wonder? Well, if you are a philosopher, there is an argument in traditional Western philosophy that argues that you can engender wonder by simply being aware of this sort of philosophical fact. That this is a quote by a Western philosopher, that basically why there is something when there could be nothing. Just the fact that some things exist should be enough to create wonder. Some people call this the fundamental question. The existentialist Martin Heidegger called it that. Many people may dismiss this as kind of a meaningless approach to wonder, but Witherall, this philosopher I quoted, says, a feeling of awe at the existence of something rather than nothing is appropriate and desirable. So basically, the raw experience of life should be enough to induce awe and joy and wonder. But this philosophical approach isn't enough for me. I don't know if it's enough for you, but it doesn't quite work. And I don't meditate regularly. So again, what are other methods we might get wonder? Well, the center of my talk today is about creation, whether it's music or visual arts or poetry. Maybe we can create wonder. Because if human beings can take what's familiar and reconfigure it into something novel, we are the producers of moments of wonder. That's our challenge. If we get jaded, how can we refigure the world around us and make it new for us in imaginative reconfiguration? And the artists at the Renwick Gallery did just that because they took natural materials that you see all the time, reeds and straw and wood and fabrics and fiber, and they put it together in ways that were unusual and different that defied our expectations. The works of art encouraged us to look through and up and over and around. It changed our perspective in unexpected ways. So new created environments are ways that we can create wonder. And that's the point of a lot of great architecture. I mean, certainly in the times of most of the great works of art, they were created for religious purposes. So wonder's wrapped up in religion. I mean, look at how old, like Stonehenge, go way back. Or the Mayan temples. They direct your attention where? To the sun, and the shadows that are cast. Or if you go into Chartres or Notre Dame, they direct you up, the vaulted arches, pulling your mind upwards, trying to encourage you to look. So that's very, very purposeful to try to get you to change your perspective. Jesse Prince says, it's no accident that places of worship often exaggerate feelings of wonder. Temples have grand, looming columns, dazzling stained glass windows, vaulted ceilings, and intricately decorated surfaces. Now again, during the Middle Ages, art and wonder was infused quite often in a religious fear. When you use the term awe, which is often associated with wonder, awe often brings with it elements of fear, subjugation, fear of punishment. And this form of wonder might induce feelings of unworthiness, being vulnerable to an all-powerful God. But during the Renaissance, art began to separate from religion. Art and wonder began to be produced and credited to humans for the first time. During the Middle Ages, artists were basically channels through which God gave them creation. That's how it was put. But during the Renaissance, people no longer felt like God held a monopoly. It was no longer sacrilegious to say, I created X, Y, or Z. That was considered almost sacrilegious, because only God can create. For the first time, signatures were put on works of art. Before the Renaissance, signatures weren't used because it wasn't really you. But signatures began to be used, and people began to be associated as being creative individuals. Some people said they had divine powers themselves, and cults began to come around the various signatures. So this whole idea of humans creating wonder was more acceptable during the real birth, in my mind, of modern humanism. I don't necessarily say that humans are the sole creator, because I think animals create and experience wonder too. It does get me thinking about that. Certainly they experience novel and unexpected things, and they show that experience in their expressions. I mean, what does a dog do in wonder? It just stares at it. And you know the dog's saying, what? The primatologist Jane Goodall talked about wonder. She said that she saw the apes of the Gombe preserve all the time expressing wonder. There was one particular scene in front of this sparkling waterfall. She said there was a male chimp perched on a nearby rock, gaping at the flowing torrents of water for a good 10 minutes. Just wide-eyed. So, it is rooted in our animal past. Now, is it a product of evolution, some people say? What's the evolutionary principle that creates wonder? Maybe wonder helps create a healthy curiosity that leads to technological adaptations and improvements. That's perhaps true. But evolution works very slowly, right? We've been around for 200,000 years in our sort of present form, but the oldest cave paintings are only 40,000 years old. So creativity came relatively late in the development of Homo sapiens. And wonder-inducing art flourishes also in places where we have the leisure time to get involved with that, where life is more stable and there's safety involved. So maybe wonder isn't a product of evolution, maybe it's just a byproduct. I'm not sure. I don't know whether it has a purpose necessarily. But I do feel more positively and assuredly that it helps our lives. Wonder fills our lives, makes it more worth living. One of my favorite philosophers, William James, talks about wonder and awe and grateful admiration, as he calls it. And he says that people that have those experiences are, quote-unquote, healthy-minded. They can access it. They live full lives. The sick soul, as James talks about, is caught in a pessimistic worldview, less able to access wonder and awe. So I do think that the experience of wonder helps us live rewarding and productive lives. And without such experiences, our personalities atrophy some. So practice any of those methods to include in your life greater wonder. But I want to conclude with one aspect of wonder that was not talked about in any of the literature I saw. When Nicholas Bell, the curator at the Renwick, wrote the phrase about how art startles us, overwhelms us, and invites us to marvel, he was focusing on the internal experience of wonder. But wonder has behavioral and social characteristics because it moves us to share it with others. It moves us to share it with other people around us. Once we recover from the internal experience that wonder can induce, once we rebalance ourselves, basically, our first impulse is to say, hey, look! We turn to each other with wondrous faces. And that creates such positive energy and joy and bonds people together. You remember where you were when you saw that meteor storm. You remember the people you were with. You remember the children you were with. It bonds us together in positive energy. That's certainly what I'm going to remember the most about my visit to the Renwick, is being with my wife and my niece and my daughter and watching them laugh and smile and pull me over and talk about it. We compared them. I like to rank them. They didn't like that. But we all experienced wonder in different ways. And there were so many shared moments of wonder that it drew me almost back to when I was a father of small children. All my kids are in their 20s now. But it drew me back to those moments where my kids had those moments of incredible capturing a firefly and letting it go on a summer night. That sort of joy. Whether it's inspired by looking out at the Grand Canyon, or gazing at a sparkling waterfall, or just watching the sunset over a river, wonder can create a sense of warmth and joy in our community and our social life. So when we're crowded in our mundane moments in our lives and harried by having to check all the things off a to-do list, let's not forget to keep wonder alive. My hope is as we go into the next year of programming at this place, wonder will fill our hearts and fill our community. Hopefully it will fill your lives with